And good afternoon. We will begin today with the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer, as usual. O Sanje Chedan Soge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dane Chabsum Che Dage Jinso Gibe Sunam Jidola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sange Chedan Soge Chanam La Chancho Pardo Dane Chabsum Che Dage Jinso Gibe Sanam Jidola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Sangye Chedan Soge Chonam La Chancho Pard Kyabsum Che Dage Jinso Gibe Sanam Jidola Penjir Sanje Drobar Sho Zemjen Tamje Dewa Tan Dewe Judan Dembar Jurje Donga Dan Donga Judan Rawar Jurje Donga Me Ben Dewa Tamba Tam Min Rawar Jurje Nyeren Shadan Nitan Rave Tanyon Shembola Nemba Jurje. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times. Who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious root gurus. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion. Please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so now please, as usual, remind yourselves of your motivation. Try to have as good a motivation as you can. The best motivation is the motivation of bodhicitta, the motivation that recognizes that not only is the suffering of samsara unbearable for ourselves, it's unbearable for all sentient beings. Of course, this means that we first have to recognize that the suffering of samsara is unbearable. And once we recognize that it's unbearable for ourselves and for all other sentient beings, then we see no choice but to get out and bring all other sentient beings out of the suffering of samsara. And so when we look for a way to do that, there aren't that many ways. Most of the ways we try don't really work, or they don't last for a long time. So we find that the only way to do it is if you have to find someone who's a reliable guide, who has done it before. If you're going to go to a new place, you need to get directions on how to get there from someone who's been there. And so that would be the Buddha and the great bodhisattvas. And so we have to follow them. And what they tell us in all the teachings is that we need to try to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings, and that that's the only way to do it. Now, for us as ordinary sentient beings, we don't know this on our own, really, but we have to take a little bit of a trust, a little bit of faith, but we can also think. But we have to take the time to think and take the time to really consider what we learn, think about it, really contemplate it, so that it's not just mere words, but it's so that it's something that actually affects us, affects our behavior. So when we listen to the Dharma, we need to think to ourselves, yeah, this is the reason why I'm doing it. This is why I need to I need to follow that path that was taught by the Buddha, was taught by all the great masters, many of whom have attained Buddhahood, many of whom have attained other results, by many of the great masters who are still alive today. Within the Tibetan tradition, we'd have, of course, the Dalai Lama, Sakyatris, and the Gyawan Karmapa. We have masters like Trungpa Rinpoche, the founder of this monastery, who give us the example and show us what we need to do. And so we need to try to be like them. And that means that we have to develop that resolve ourselves. And so please try to listen with this motivation to these teachings this afternoon. And so with this motivation of bodhicitta. The Dharma that we are speaking about is or discussing, I don't know if we can really call this discussing, I'm just speaking the whole time. The Dharma I'm lecturing about, the Dharma that you are listening to is the verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu. And its commentary, Youthful play by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje, which is kind of a nice, short commentary, easy for us to handle in this sort of a situation. If we were going through Mikya Dorje's commentary, for example, we wouldn't even be done with the third chapter yet, because it's just so much more. But we're going through on Wangchuk Dorje's commentary, which is a good medium for us right now. And in this commentary, in the verses of the Treasury of Abhidharma, there are the 8 chapters, and so we've been discussing the 4th chapter, the teachings on karma. And this is actually a really important chapter for us because it's like the heart. Or one of the most, I don't know if you can say it's the heart. What is the heart of Dharma? Nonviolence, loving kindness. But at the same time, it's based on the understanding of karmic cause and effect. It's really critical for us to understand and accept karmic cause and effect. So when we're studying a text like this, and it's always good to kind of get this big view and this kind of detailed view about all the various permutations of karma and the different types of karma, where it applies, how it works, where it ripens, and so forth. This is all extremely important to know, but at the same time as we're listening to it, we have to make sure that it's not just something that we are listening to, and it's not just something that we're trying to learn on a surface level. We have to let it become something where we can have it affect our behavior. These teachings on karmic cause and effect are critical for our practice. Sometimes people think that study and practice are different, and you can especially look at that with a teaching like the Treasury of Abhidharma, where it seems like it's a really academic teaching. But it's really connected with our practice. Now, I'd meant to start out today by making an announcement, and I got involved in another train of thought. So I better make the announcement before I forget. And this announcement is that coming up on the full moon, which is Friday, the full moon day is Friday, we will be having, instead of class here at Trungpa Monastery, because it's the anniversary of the Buddha's birth, the Buddha's enlightenment, and the Buddha passing into parinirvana, the 3 anniversaries all on one day. Instead of having class, we'll be having puja. I think we will be doing the Ocean of Kaju songs, also called the Rain of Wisdom, on Friday. And so because that takes all day, we will not be having the Abhidharma class on Friday. So all of you who are watching at home, I would like to encourage you to take this time to, I imagine, I'm not certain, maybe oh yeah. So on Friday, the puja will be webcast, so I'd like to encourage you all to join us in the webcast. Then Saturday and Sunday, according to the monastery's original schedule, was supposed to be a nyungne. And this is always it's an annual event here at the Trungpa Monastery, and it's a really, actually, I've had the good fortune to participate in it twice, and I think it's a really wonderful thing. It's always wonderful to see all the members of the community coming in and spending 2 days during the Nyungne together. But because of the coronavirus epidemic and the restrictions, we are unable to do that. So I think we will have our class as usual on Saturday and Sunday. And I'd just like to recommend to all of you who are listening in person or listening at home, that in the future, when we can once again have Nyungnes and pujas at this monastery, that you consider coming and joining us for the Nyungne, because I think it's a really beneficial practice, and it's always wonderful to do it in a group, especially it's done really well here at this monastery. So that's our break from our commercial sponsor, it's our announcements for the day. So when we talk about karma, we need to make sure that karma, we let it actually affect ourselves, that we let these teachings actually be something that's more than just intellectual. And when we bring it into our practice, sometimes it's hard to square with our practice, because in the Treasury of Abhidharma in particular, it's talking about a lot of practices that we don't actually do in the Tibetan tradition. It talks about practicing the dhyanas, and it talks about the formless meditations. And it talks about meditating to meditations that lead to rebirth on certain levels and so forth. And so we might wonder, what does this have to do with us? We do Nyungne practices, we do Ngundro, we do deity practices, we do shamatha, we do insight meditation, we do all these other meditations, but we don't do the dhyanas. So why do we need to learn this? Well, for one thing, actually, the dhyanas, in particular the formless realms, are kind of from our perspective in the Mahamudra tradition, they are a bit of a detour. So we need to know how to you have to know what they are in order to know why you need to avoid them. And we covered that a lot in the main reasons we covered in the third chapter, the teachings on the world, the formless meditation. You practice formless meditation now, and that is unmoving karma that will in the future ripen as rebirth in the formless realm. And you might think, great, well, it's 20,000 great eons spent just doing nothing. That's just one example. But really the greater problem, I think, is that we have problems of actually really seeing in our daily life how karmic cause and effect really affects us. And so, we can say, okay, the formless realm is like it's a detour, it's a dead end that we need to avoid at all costs. Yeah, so what if we don't really believe it? So what if we don't really believe in the ripening of karma? And this is something that's hard for us to develop. It's something we have to think about from the very beginning of our practice, especially once you begin practicing what we call the preliminary practices, which really for Westerners probably should not be the first practice you do, because it already presupposes a certain understanding. Now, some people do start fairly early on the preliminary practices, and sometimes it works out okay, and sometimes it doesn't. You never know. It really depends upon the individual, but when you start out thinking about the very first of the four common preliminaries, the precious human body with its leisures and resources, how do we end up with this human body? Because if you look at it by the numbers, and I think I've mentioned this a couple of times, the odds, if it's just purely random chance, the odds of being born human are tiny, microscopic. We're far more likely to be reborn as an insect, even with the decline in insect populations because of the habitat destruction and so forth. Even with all of that, in Germany, there are 50% fewer insects than there were, maybe 70% fewer insects than there were a few decades ago. And you might think, okay, well, it's easier not to be born an insect. Well, no. There's still a whole lot more insects out there than there are humans. And insects take birth so many more times than humans do that just your chance of becoming a human. So you have to think about, what is it that allows me? What is it that allowed me now to be reborn as a human? How did I get here? Now, we aren't going to be able to come back to any specific, unless you develop the dhyana meditations and the capability of remembering your past lives. You're not going to be able to say, yes, in the past I offered some lama a bag of tsampa, and so now I'm born here as a human. You're just not going to be able to say that. But I'm not sure that it's necessary to be able to say that, because if you're starting looking for that, you're looking for stories and you're looking for some identity about yourself or something. That's not what's important. If you look at what is it that could possibly cause rebirth like this, it's hard to see. When you look at all of our actions, you have to do meritorious actions. And it's really hard to do meritorious actions to be reborn as a human. You have to do actions that when you do them, your motivation, the causal motivation and the contemporaneous motivation, both of those motivations have to be virtue. That means you have to have the sense of a good conscience while you do them. You have to care about what other people think. And you have to feel faith as you're doing the faith. You have to have that purity. When we mean faith, what we really mean is like a purity or sincerity of mind. You have to have that quality of purity in your mind as you do the action. And most of the time we do actions that we think are for the good, but do we really have that in our minds? And so now all over the world, in Hong Kong and America in particular, people are trying to act in ways that they think are going to bring peace and happiness and justice and law and order and whatever. And everyone has completely different ideas of what those words mean. The people on both sides essentially want the same thing, but they just have different ideas of how to get there. And they don't look at their minds while they're acting. We think that the ends justify the means. We think that if it's going to produce a good social outcome, it's going to justify the actions. And then we get carried away because we're ordinary individuals. And so when we're trying to be Dharma practitioners, we have to try to do what we can to counter that. So for that reason, we have to think about it. We have to really contemplate these teachings. We have to remember impermanence. Remember that we've only got a short time in this lifetime, and we have to use it as much as we can. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't stand up for right or wrong, whatever that might be. But that when you do that, you have to be really careful about your heart, really careful about your mind, because it's so easy to get carried away and go over the edge. That's not even something that only applies when you have situations such as are happening in Hong Kong and America, and probably other places that are just not as prominent in the news. Even when we're doing our practice, we have to make sure that our practice is going to be actually turn into virtue. It's so easy for us to sit down and think, especially when you get used to doing practice, you get up and you do your morning meditation, or whenever it is that you do your meditation in the day, you sit down to do the meditation, and you've got, especially if you've been practicing for a long time, you've got a long set of habits that you've built up. And you kind of go on to autopilot. And it's so easy to be sitting there. Your mouth might be saying, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, and your mind is like, Om Mani Padme Hum. It's all over there, and it doesn't matter what you're. So we get distracted. And in some ways, the longer we've been practicing the Dharma, the worse it gets. This is why Trubin Ken Rinpoche, Khenpo David, often talks about not liking to teach long-time practitioners. It's because we get stuck in our ways. So we must not let ourselves get stuck in the ways. Instead, we have to look and see, what can we do to actually make the Dharma affect ourselves? Because if we are still doing the same thing and not seeing any results, that's a sign about our practice. If you've been practicing for 10 or 20 years and you don't feel like you've changed, then that's a sign about how you've been practicing. So So you've got to look at it. And the main thing we have to look at is try to look and see, how are we actually better people? Are our minds more peaceful? And then we need to use the contemplations of impermanence in the precious human body, the contemplations of karmic cause and effect to spur us on to actually changing, to actually putting effort into trying to be careful in our practices, trying to really make it something that's going to affect us. Now, if we don't do that, of course, it's still more beneficial to keep practicing Dharma than to not. But we just don't know how many chances we're going to get. So it's really crucial that we try to take the teachings to heart and let them affect us. So then then when we're talking about the teachings, they get to be pretty academic, and you're wondering how does this actually affect me? And so that's part of what I'm trying to say a little bit about that. I mean, I'm certainly not an expert. I'm an ordinary individual myself, and I look at my own practice and I see that I've got many of the faults that I speak about for others. Maybe that's one reason why I can say something about them, is because I see them in myself. And so if I'm able to say anything about it, it's really because of the time I've spent with Trungpa Rinpoche and with the Gyalwang Karmapa, that I have anything to say about it, but I wouldn't feel like I have, I'm not an authority about what comes on the other side, but we can still look. We have to take these teachings and we have to look at them and see how do they actually apply. So here we are discussing the teachings on karma. And the teachings on karma begin with an overview of how everything arises from karma. From karma, various worlds are born. Then there's the presentation of karma itself, and at the end of the chapter there is a presentation of synonyms of dharmas as an overview. So in the middle, the understanding karma itself, there is the identification of karma. So identifying karma, we have volition and what mind creates. So volition is mental karma. Initially, what initially gets us to do it. And then the two types of intended karma. Karma of body and speech. Then within the karma of body and speech, for both of them, there is perceptible karma of body and speech. And perceptible karma of body is a shape, something you can see. Prostration is something you can see. Killing is an action you can see unless there's no light. It's still shape. Speech, perceptible speech, is sound. Then the imperceptible actions primarily refers to our vows and commitments. And the ones, they're good vows and there are wrong vows. And the good vows we want are the vows, the pratimoksha vows and the dhyana vows and the undefiled vows. Well, the undefiled vows are going to come when we achieve the path of seeing, when we see the truth, the nature of the Four Noble Truths. So we don't need to worry so much about taking them now. We need to worry about achieving that level, right? How are we going to achieve that level? We have to do it by practicing discipline. And that means the pratimoksha vow. So it's really critically important for us to live our lives with a pratimoksha vow. You should take a pratimoksha vow if you're going to consider yourself a Buddhist and you really want to practice. You should have one of the levels of pratimoksha vows. And because you can take so many different levels of the lay precepts, it's actually not so hard. If you are not planning to murder anyone, you can take at least that one precept. If you're planning not to steal anything, you can take that one precept. Maybe that even makes two you can take. You can at least do something. You can't, because these are precepts. The pratimoksha vows are vows about giving up harming other sentient beings. And now we might think to ourselves, well, in the Mahayana, this is not as important. We need to take the bodhisattva vow. Well, how can you take the bodhisattva vow, whose essence is to benefit others, if you don't first give up harming others? It's kind of like, what's the point of, I'm benefiting other beings while at the same time you're not giving up harming them? If you can't even commit to not harming sentient beings, how can you take them? For this reason, take the bodhisattva vows. For this reason, in the Mahayana, it is taught that the pratimoksha vows are the basis for taking the bodhisattva vow. So you have to have that basis in the pratimoksha discipline first. Then you can take the bodhisattva vow. And then you might think to yourself, well, I'm a tantric practitioner. Well, you can't take the tantric practitioner without you can't become really a tantric practitioner without the bodhisattva vow. If you don't have bodhicitta, and if you aren't willing to commit to that, and you call yourself a tantric practitioner, who are you faking? Probably yourself. Certainly the wrong is, the harm that comes from it is going to come to yourself. So you have to have all three levels of vow. This is critical for our Tibetan practice. You have to live by all three levels of vow. If you're going to have the tantric practices, and you have to have the bodhisattva vow, that means you have to have the pratimoksha vows. Now, the ways that we practice these all together is a very different topic than is discussed in the Abhidharma. But the point of bringing this up is that we have to really treasure the pratimoksha vows. They're a great opportunity. And in many ways, they're much easier to keep than the bodhisattva vows or the tantric vows, especially tantric vows are not easy to keep. So we need to keep the pratimoksha discipline. We have to have that as the basis for everything else. So in the discussion, so after that discussion, that brief presentation of karma, there is a discussion of the general presentation of karma according to the Great Exposition. And then there's the point where we have come to now, which is the presentation of karma according to the sutras. And so, of course, the Great Exposition tradition is also based upon the sutras. And when you read the commentaries, they're backing up everything with the points from the sutras. But the main kind of topics that are talked about in that, really the main subject of that section, are these imperceptible forms, the vows. That's really the main point. And the imperceptible forms are not explicitly taught in the sutras. They're implicitly taught, you could say. So for the meaning of karma as explained in the sutras, this is taught on begins on page 327. And so this has two topics, so they're basically two parts. There's the general teachings and the specific explanations. So the general teachings has four topics. Classifying karma, that is, classifying in terms of cause and result. So classifying the karma in terms of their causes, and then in terms of the results that they're going to bring. Teaching the many enumerations of karma, different types and different synonyms, which karma has how many results, and other presentations of karma. So the first one is classifying in terms of cause and result. So this has three topics: classifying in terms of result, classifying them in terms of cause, and classifying in terms of both cause and result. So those are the three sections. So we start with classifying it in terms of the result. This has four topics: classifying in three as virtue, etc. Then classifying in three as merit, etc. Classifying in three by experience, and the explanation of the latter two. That is, classifying in three in merit and classifying in three by experience. So classifying in three as virtue and so forth. So the root text in verse 45 begins, pleasant, unpleasant, and other karma are virtue, non-virtue, and other. So here we're saying the result, the pleasant result, that would be virtue. Virtuous karma has a pleasant result. The unpleasant result comes from non-virtue. and other karma, that is not the results that are neither pleasant nor unpleasant, that is neutral, are other, that is neutral actions. So the sutras say karma is threefold. Karma that produces pleasantness and that does not produce pleasantness but produces unpleasantness, that is pain, and other karma that does not produce either pleasantness or unpleasantness are in succession virtue, non-virtue, and other, that is neutral. So virtue means the karma that is going to produce a pleasant result that protects you from suffering either in the short term or forever, or for lasting protection, which is nirvana. So this would include any virtuous action that's going to provide us temporary pleasant experiences, such as prosperity, long life, a good rebirth, and so forth. I suppose a long life isn't necessarily a good thing on its own, depending on where you're born. But if pretending that you're born in a good place and have a long life, that's better. Now these are, of course, there's still samsaric results, but they're important. Because if you don't have the leisure to practice the Dharma, then what good does it do to you? You look at people, all people essentially have the same capabilities on a fundamental level. But because of the situations they're brought into, some people don't have the opportunity to develop it further. Other people are put into positions where they can develop it further. It's the result of karma, that we're born into some situation. How is it that we got here in some situation where all of us who are listening now have, to some degree, whether small or great, we've come into contact with the Dharma. And so how is it that that happened? It's just incredible. I look at my own life and think, how did I go from just being a regular American kid to being what I am now? I don't know if you really want to be like that, but it's how did it happen? And how did I get that chance? And really there was a lot. I don't feel like I chose any of it. It just sort of developed. And what could that be besides karma? So that's pleasant. And it's important to have that leisure, because without leisure you can't practice the Dharma. This is something important to think about. If we didn't have this position, all of you have the ability to listen right now, whether in person, a few in person, more over webcast. So how did that come about? Where did you get that leisure time to do it? Now, you might not feel like you have a lot of leisure time, but you've got enough time that you can take it and you can do something with it. That's really actually something pretty extraordinary. Most people don't have that. And then unpleasantness, so that's a non-virtue. Unvirtuous karma is the karma that results in pain and suffering, rebirth in lower realms, and so forth. And the neutral karma that produces other neutral results. So the non-virtuous karma, we have to be very careful about that. We have to recognize, and it's hard. When you say, it's easy to say that something is a non-virtuous karma, but to actually, when you are in the position where you really want to do that action, it's easy to say we recognize what non-virtue is, we know what non-virtue is, but can we actually hold ourselves back at that point where there is something that we want to do and that our habits and our emotions are driving us towards doing? Are we able to hold back and not do it? Do we have that deep enough of an appreciation of karma to recognize that doing this, however satisfying you might think it's going to be, and it will not be as satisfying as you think, usually. No matter how satisfying it is, even if it is satisfying for you in the short term, in the long term, what's going to come of it? If we don't have that capacity, how are we going to let this, if we don't have that confidence in karmic cause and effect, how are we going to actually let this really change our behavior? So then we have classifying in three as merit, etc. Merit, non-merit, and unmoving. The sutras also say that there are three types of meritorious, non-meritorious, and unmoving karma. And so in terms of, so this basically, it's similar to the virtue, non-virtue, and other karma, but it's a little bit different. And the difference is an interesting one to think about. The three experience, so when you talk about what they're talking about, when you're classifying them by experience, classifying them as merit, so when you classify them by merit, we have merit, non-merit, and unmoving. And the classifying by experience, they're the three experienced as pleasure, etc. And these are the similar. So then there are another three types of karma that are taught. Karma experienced as pleasure, etc., including karma experienced as suffering, and karma experienced as neutral. So karma that is experienced as pleasure is the karma that is going to produce a a pleasant result in the desire realm, such as humans or gods, or even a pleasant result as an animal. It's possible. There's some dogs who haven't made. They think. Well, they don't think. They just blah, blah, blah. But anyways, so it can be experienced in the desire realm. It can be experienced on the lower realms, the lower three levels of the form realm, where you've got experiences of pleasure. So when you have the first jhana, that's accompanied by feelings of pleasure and joy. So pleasure here refers to the bodily, the faculty of pleasure. And then on the second jhana, you have joy, which is mental pleasure. And then on the third jhana, you have cognitive pleasure. So you've got these three different types of pleasure on the form realms, and the pleasures that come from jhana. So that would be the karma experienced as pleasure. Then karma that is experienced as unpleasant, that is as painful, would be the karma that's experienced as the results, as the what do we say? The karma that's experienced in the lower realms, or in the human realm when we experience suffering in the human realm, or even in the God realms when you're experiencing the suffering before dying and so forth. And karma experienced as neutral. Karma experienced as neutral here refers to the experiences on the fourth jhana, where there's no faculty of pleasure, and in the formless realms. So in these, the quality of the meditation, the feeling of the meditation is a feeling of just neutral meditation. Not pleasant, not unpleasant. And so it's a very refined feeling, and the pleasure has a little bit of a coarse aspect to it in comparison. And so for that reason, in a sense, this is a greater pleasure without actually feeling pleasure, to be on those levels of the fourth jhana and the formless realm. So now the explanation of the latter two. This is two topics, explaining merit and so forth, and then explaining the three ways it is experienced and additional points. So explaining merit and so forth has 2 points. The meritorious karma. Merit is virtuous karma of desire. So when we talked before about in line 45C at the bottom of page 327, merit, non-merit, and unmoving. So here, this is the explanation of two of these three terms. Meritorious karma. Merit is virtuous karma of desire. Because it is the antidote for non-merit, merit is the virtuous karma of the desire realm. So if you want to counteract non-merit, then you need to meditate on merit, right? So this is the antidote for merit. It's like when we're thinking about the different sorts of afflictions that motivate non-merit. If you're talking about the affliction of hatred, what is the antidote for hatred? It is loving kindness, so you meditate on loving kindness. What is the antidote for stinginess? It is generosity. So so in these ways, the merit that comes from loving kindness and generosity and so forth is the antidote for the non-merit that comes out of hatred and stinginess and so forth. Merit is virtuous karma of the desire realm. So here an interesting point. In both Tibetan and in Sanskrit, the words for merit that we translate as merit, shall we say, so punya in Sanskrit and sunam in Tibetan, can also refer to like bounty or plenty. So actually sometimes when we're translating into English, sometimes we just see the word Tibetan word sunam, merit. You don't even think. Sunam, merit, sunam, merit, sunam, merit. But you actually have to be careful because there are instances where it doesn't mean merit as we understand merit in English. It actually means bounty. And here I think it's kind of meaning both. Because less of the goodness, the good things you get in the desire realm come out of our meritorious karma, right? So in this way you're talking like saying both the cause and the result are kind of covered by the same word, the merit of this. So the merits of the world, come from our meritorious karma. And this is only in the desire realm. It doesn't apply to the karma that would go into the form realm, because in the form realm you're not going to worry so much about those. You've got other joys. You don't have to worry about bounty and all that. So the next type of karma is unmoving karma. Unmoving is of higher. Because the karma fully ripens on just those levels, it does not move. That should really be a semicolon there rather than a period and then a comma in the middle of that line there. Unmoving karma is virtuous karma of the higher form and formless levels. That is, it means the karma of performing the dhyana and formless meditations. So basically we say unmoving karma, that dhyana, when you gain the level of the first dhyana, that is an action that is going to result in rebirth in the first level of form, and then the second dhyana, the second level of form, and so forth for each of the four dhyanas and four formless realms, four formless meditations, I should say. But here there's a problem because, and we actually mentioned on this at the end of the third chapter. You might remember, why is it, there's the discussion at the end of the third chapter, why is it that the first, second, and third levels of form are destroyed at the ends of great eons, but the fourth isn't? It's because the fourth is unmoving, but the first, second, and third are moving. How is it that they move? And so here, that's the point that's being brought up here. Well then, it says, the sutra says, in this first jhana there is analysis and examination, so the nobles move. And likewise, in the second jhana, there are the faults of the second jhana and the third jhana. So does this not explain that the three jhanas, that is the first, second, and third jhana, are moving? So the consideration and analysis, the joy in the first jhana, the joy in the second jhana, and the mental pleasure in the third jhana cause a little bit of motion in the mind. They're moving. So how is it that we can say that the karma that leads to rebirth there is unmoving karma, when actually you've got that motion on those levels? So so does this not explain that the three karma jhanas are moving, you ask? So that's the objection that's being brought up, or the question. That is said because those faults, those levels have the faults of samadhis, not in terms of unmoving karma. So really what we're saying, and this is explained in further depth in the auto commentary and other commentaries, is that the first, second, and third karmas do have the faults of motion in compared to the fourth jhana and the four formless levels. So they do have those faults. However, they're kind of directed towards. They're like precursors to lead to achieving that unmoving level. So on that, those moving levels are the fourth jhana and the four formless. And so for that reason, because they kind of lead up to it, they're the stages that you have to go through to get to those levels, then you can call them unmoving karma. But the other reason, and this is the reason that is more often given and that is more well known among people because it's the easier one to understand, is the completing karma of the form and formless realms cannot fully ripen on another level. So the karma that is going to ripen, that's going to propel a rebirth and that's going to complete, that is, it's going to finish, provide everything else you need in that, or you're going to experience in that lifetime. So the propelling and the completing karmas, which we'll come up with in a few days. The completing karma of the form in the formless realm, as well as the propelling karma. I'm not sure why he doesn't say propelling karma, but the karma that's going to ripen on those realms can't ripen on any other realm. So when you gain the jhana meditations, if you gain the first jhana meditation, you are going to be reborn on the first level of form. Now, there are 3 levels there depending upon the strength of your meditation, but that also is determined by the strength of your meditation, so it's unmoving. And similarly, the second dhyana is going to ripen only on the second dhyana. The sense base of nothingness is only going to ripen on the third level of formless, and so forth. Each of those specific meditations is only going to ripen on its particular level. It can't move to another level, hence it is called unmoving. This is why I think Ian Coughlin, in his translation of the Chim Jambyang's ornament of Abhidharma, calls it invariable karma. So invariable karma actually gets this meaning of the term very well, although I'm not certain that it's works as well with the other meaning of unmoving. So this is always the problem when you're trying to figure out terminology. You kind of have to pick one or the other. But also I think that unmoving has been a slightly more common translation of this term in the past. Anyways, that is kind of a digression. So what is the reason? It's because that karma fully ripens on just those levels. So the karma of each of the jhanas only ripens on the particular of the form realm, the karma, the formless meditations only on the formless level. This pervades because it is unmoving. It does not move to other levels in dependence on conditions. So once you have that motivation, then no matter what else you do, what other conditions you provide, that karma is not going to ripen on any other level. Well, now here comes another interesting point, because you might say, well, then the karma that's going to ripen in desire realm only ripens on desire realm, and it's not going to ripen on the form realm. Forget about the non-virtue and the neutral of desire realm. Even the virtue of the desire realm could at best result in rebirth as a god of the desire realm, but not in the formless realm. So how is it that this could be possible? That's the point that says on the last line of page 328, well then, in desire as well, the full ripening does not move to other levels. Because in desire, there are no separate levels, you say. You know, like in the form realm, you've got the 4 levels of formless. The formless realm, you've got the 4 levels of formless. Desire, it's just the desire realm. But the response is, this is not a fault. So this is not a problem. That doesn't mean that the realm, the desire realm karma is unmoving. And the reason it is not unmoving is that even though there are no separate levels there, even though, in other words, the levels here refer to the kind of levels of the various gradations of subtlety of meditation and mind and so forth. And in desire, it's all pretty coarse. But the wanderers of the higher realms and lower realms are separate. The gods and the hells and the humans, the animals and the hungry ghosts are all separate realms. And so they're separate. But the karma is not necessarily separate, because if you do a generous action, then that generous action could ripen on your birth as, say, one of the pampered dogs I was joking about a few moments ago. Or it could result as prosperity as a human, or it could result as birth as a god. It can ripen on any of those different levels. Ripening, it could even ripen among the hungry ghosts. Hells, it seems a little bit harder for the desire for the merit to ripen there. The example given here is like, if you think about it, you've got the karma in the auto commentary, and in Yashabitra, it talks about how this karma, like you might have the karma to be reborn, to be reborn and have the body and the splendor, the majesty and the wealth of a god. And yet, at the same time, you engage in killing. And because of that, then you might be reborn as an elephant who is then decked out with ornaments, that has a majestic, strong body, the wealth of the ornaments, and yet it is still unable. The elephants are intelligent animals, but they're animals, and they'd have less of an opportunity to practice Dharma. And this is, I think, a point where it shows how important it is to keep the vows. Because generosity, if we don't keep vows, can ripen anywhere. If we don't refrain from killing, if we don't make vows to refrain from killing and so forth, and we could be as generous as we want in this lifetime, and we could just end up being, the king of Nagas, we could say in terms of the scriptures, but who among us really knows what the king of Nagas is? It seems like frankly, to most Westerners who don't grow up in this culture, it seems like just sort of a mythological being. But, we can see lots of pampered animals. Where did they come from? And people who are, the beings who are reborn as rich people's pets generally have it pretty good. Not even just rich people. Sometimes people treat their pets better than they treat their children. And so, if your karma is to be reborn, your karma is to be born wealthy, and so you end up as a wealthy person's pet. What good does that do you in the end? So this is why it's so important to practice this. Oh, where did I go? Oh, my pages. Where did I get to? Oh, there's my bookmark. There we are. So the wanderers of the higher realms and lower realms are separate. So the virtue of the desire realm can ripen in any of the different ones. And I think the one that is most important to think about, there are three different types of virtue. There's the virtue that arises from giving, the merit that arises from giving, the merit that arises from discipline, the merit that arises from samadhi. So the merit that arises from giving is quite variable. The merit that arises from discipline is going to keep you in at least the higher realms, the gods and humans. So that's an important thing to keep. And then there's the merit of samadhi, and that can depend upon whether you achieve undefiled samadhi and so forth. There are many, but it's also only going to bring you to higher. But you have to have all three types of merit. We can't just rely on generosity and dhyana and meditation. If you practice generosity and meditation, but then go fishing every weekend, it's like, what's it going to do? So these are taught solely in terms of the defiled. So these three different types of, this is talking about the merit and the unmoving, is primarily only talking about the defiled karmas that are ripening as rebirth. Undefiled karmas don't ripen as rebirth. They're the antidote for rebirth. And here there's an interesting sentence in the auto commentary, which basically says that here, you're not describing non-meritorious karma because it's so well known in the world that there's why bother tiring ourselves talking about it. And this is an interesting sentence, because if it really were well known in the world, then people would understand and not do it. And yet people continue to do it. People continue to act in non-meritorious ways. So we can talk about next we've come to the next section, which is, where did we get to? Talking about explaining the three ways it is experienced and so forth. So this is continuing the explanation of merit and those experienced as pleasure and so forth. So this explanation has the three topics: the actual explanation of the way the three karmas is experienced, additionally teaching the 5 ways karma is experienced, and third is understanding the particulars of experience. The actual explanation of the 3 ways karma is experienced has 2 points: the essence of each individually and presenting others' positions. The essence of each individually has 3 points. So karma experienced as pleasure. So virtue is experienced as pleasure through the 3rd dhyana. Defiled virtue from the desire realm through the 3rd dhyana is karma experienced as pleasure. So when you do a defiled virtuous act, so this can either be generosity and defiled discipline and so forth, or it can be dhyana and so forth. It's not the undefiled dhyana. So up through the 3rd dhyana is experienced as pleasure. And the reason is that those beings on those 3 levels have the pleasure of body. It says here body and mind, but it really should be body and or mind when you get to the levels of the form realms. The feeling of pleasure and desire, and on the 1st dhyana is bodily pleasure. On the 2nd dhyana, it is mental pleasure, and on the 3rd dhyana, it is cognitive pleasure. So these are the different types of pleasure. So we've already discussed that a little bit, but basically this is saying that the karma experience, when we have virtue, defiled virtuous actions are experienced as pleasure defiled virtuous actions that are experienced as pleasure are experienced only on these 4 different levels. Yes, the 3 of jhana and the desire realm. Then the karma experienced as neutral. Above that, it's felt as neither pain nor pleasure. So above that 3rd karma, that is a virtuous karma, is felt or experienced as neither pain nor pleasure. Because in those levels, there are neither feelings of pleasure nor pain, or there are feelings of neither pleasure nor suffering. So when you have the virtuous karma, the dhyanas and the formless meditations are virtuous karma meditations because they lead to a good result. Those ripen only on those levels. In the 4th dhyana and the formless, they only ripen on levels where there is no feeling of pleasure. So it's virtue, but the result is not pleasure as in the feeling pleasure. And then, non-virtue is felt as suffering here. So at the top of the next page, the non-virtuous karma is karma that is felt or experienced as suffering here in the desire realm. So non-virtuous karma. So there's this word here. It says in the last word of the line. Here indicates that the feeling of suffering is only in desire. So this is the sensation of suffering here when we're talking about the ripening. We're talking primarily about the sensations that come up, the ripening of karma. That's the primary. It also, there are many things associated with it, but it's primarily the feeling that we're talking about. So here indicates that the feeling of suffering is only in desire. In the higher realms, there's no pain. Maybe that's why people want to be born there. Not only is the feeling itself the result of non-virtue, but the faculty and object, including the characteristics of consciousness in the assembly of sense bases, is also its result. So what this is saying is that when you do an unvirtuous action, it produces in the future, probably in a future lifetime, usually in a future lifetime, we'll get to that in a few days. It produces a result in the future. It produces a painful result. So that sensation of pain is a result. But at the same time as you have that sensation of pain, you also have a whole assembly of other things that are going on. You've got the object, the painful thing. You've got the faculty that senses it. That might be your bodily faculty. You've got the mind that is the cognition that is experiencing it. The experience is like if it's a tactile sensation, a painful tactile sensation. Say you've been reborn in the hells and you're experiencing the pain of being burnt. Or you have been born in a time when you get coronavirus and you're experiencing the pain of your lungs seizing up and you being unable to breathe. Both of those are probably fully ripened results of karma. You have that feeling of pain, and so there's the unpleasant object that's causing the pain, the fire or the illness. There's the faculty, the bodily faculty that's doing it. There is the body consciousness, that is the consciousness of feelings of touch. Those are all included. That's the meaning of, as explained in the auto commentary, including the characteristics of consciousnesses. So there's that consciousness. That consciousness arises, and it perishes. And it also endures for a very short time. It decays over a very short time, and all four of those. And so, in the assembly of sense bases. So, the assembly of a sense basis means that you've got the external sense base of the object, you've got the internal sense base of the sensory faculty, and you've also got the consciousness going at the same time. So those are also the result. All of those that are associated with that sensation. Basically, everything that's happening in your body and mind at the time of sensing that result is the result. But what this does not include is the thought. I'm going to get back at that person for doing this. I'm going to do that. The thoughts are different. So this is talking about the experience. Now, it might be an experience of mental pain that comes up because of the full ripening. But when you have thoughts that are afflicted, resentment, or spite, or contentiousness, or something like that, that is not the ripening of karma. So we're talking about experience and everything related with it, or sensation and everything related with that sensation. So that is, I think, enough for today. We are currently, what do we say? We budgeted 8 weeks for this course, and I'm not certain that it's going to take exactly 8 weeks, and even when we began the teachings, I wasn't exactly certain that we'd go all 8 weeks. I just wanted to see how long it went. I wasn't sure how much I was going to blab about other things during the session, so I wasn't sure how much time it would end up taking in the end. And at this point, we've gone through 4 of the 8 weeks. So we've got another 4 weeks budgeted, but we've gone through a little over half the material. Maybe a bit over, not just a little bit, a bit over half the material. So I'm probably going to be kind of slowing down the amount of material that I cover each day. And so you should kind of maybe take this as a chance to sort of think about it. And one of the reasons for doing this, if I wanted to, I could finish this at this pace that we've been going, probably in not so long a time, but it's, I think, a good idea because karmic cause and effect is so important. It's a good idea to take the time to make sure that we go through it slowly, make sure that we can understand. Those of you who are watching online, you can try to submit questions and so forth. So that is what we will do for the next few weeks. We still might not make it all the way out to 4 weeks, but we'll do what we can. Just try to go through it at a pace that feels like the right level. So let's now take the opportunity we have now. And this is actually a really good chance because we have done something that is meritorious by thinking about the Dharma, listening, contemplating, teaching. So now let's take this take this merit, let's please dedicate it so that all sentient beings may come to understand what it is that will bring them true happiness and follow the paths that will bring them there, so they may swiftly achieve the ultimate results of Buddhahood. O sanam de tam je se pani tobne ye pedranam pam chene Kegana che parla trobai Sibet sole ro war. Thank you.